It seems you all like it when I review some of the more infamous pieces of animation out there, and fortunately there isn't exactly a shortage of those. Leave your suggestions in the comments, by the way. So what would be a good follow-up to Euphoria and Boku no Pico? Well, seeing as I'm currently also working on a video about Rance 03, it got me thinking. There is a series that had its fair share of controversy when it dropped, and also pretty clearly takes at least a bit of inspiration from Rance. You've all seen the title of the video? I'm talking about Redo of Healer. Going in, I didn't actually know a whole lot about the series. I'd seen a handful of clips and knew it was a revenge story about an abused healing mage in a fantasy world, but this was pretty much a blind watch. Well, okay, I also knew a bit about why it's so controversial. The main character notably engages in some adult activities with people who were not necessarily super eager to engage in those adult activities with him. So of course, that brought out the moralizers who get upset when fictional characters do evil things to other fictional characters. But despite knowing about the controversy, it told me absolutely nothing about the series itself, so I went in not knowing if Redo of Healer was any good or not. So I was in a perfect position to give it a fair chance and a fair review. And just to be clear, I have not read more than the first couple chapters of the original web or light novels, though I could be convinced to cover them if that's something my audience wants. So this video will be judging the series as a standalone, not an adaptation. But before we get into it, a few very quick disclaimers. If you watched my Boku no Pico review, it's largely the same deal here. Firstly, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about the adult scenes themselves, just to avoid any potential community guidelines issues. Secondly, I'm not going to be doing what most people do when they review stuff like this, which is get on a soapbox and go on about how morally wrong I find all this behavior. We all already know that it's bad when it happens in real life, you don't need me to confirm it. Especially not if it stunlocks me and prevents me from fairly analyzing the artistic value of the series. To me, it's like reviewing a Doom game and spending the whole time complaining about the gore and how violence is bad. So don't expect a preaching session from me. Next, this won't be as much of an obvious issue as it is with Boku no Pico, but if you decide to watch Redo of Healer for yourself, just make sure you know your local laws. This is an ecchi series, and according to Google, some of the characters are canonically on the younger side, at least in the books. And while we in the US have some of the strongest speech and artistic expression protections in the world, there are countries where that is not legal. And I don't want any of you getting into any trouble over this. And lastly, unlike Euphoria and Boku no Pico, the Redo of Healer anime is owned by Kadokawa, who I know from experience are assholes who will block the video and stretch the appeals process out for weeks purely out of spite. So avoiding that is the reason you see that big image on top of everything. I hate to do it, but after a bunch of testing, it's the only thing that consistently works to avoid automatic detection that doesn't also make the editing process significantly longer. So with that, let's talk about Redo of Healer. Oh, and while I'm going to be keeping this video mostly spoiler-free, I will have to spoil a few minor things, so be aware of that. Redo of Healer is at its core all about expectation and trope subversion. The elements that you'd expect from a typical fantasy anime are completely twisted and the story is built around that angle, and it wastes very little time in that regard. In fantasy media, a very common overarching structure is that you have your hero coming from humble beginnings in a small village. This hero then has something or someone call them onto a journey where alongside a group of allies who will later become a second family of sorts, they fight against an overpowering villain. And were it not for a brief teaser at the very beginning of episode 1, that's how Redo of Healer presents itself. The first 5 minutes, so around a quarter of episode 1, show our protagonist Keyaru as an ordinary kind-hearted villager going about his daily life and interacting with his adoptive mother Anna. From there, it baits us into what we assume is that call to heroism, since a voice has been coming to him in dreams telling him to obtain the sight of the spirits. He meets the Star Spirit, and he gains that special sight which gives him information on anything he looks at. Until he looks at his reflection and the tone completely shifts. As an introductory hook, I really like this. It plays on what we typically expect from a fantasy story, and that familiarity makes the audience have a sense of, okay, I know generally where this is going, before completely shifting gears. And that draws the audience in because the familiar has become unfamiliar, and now we want to know what the fuck's going on. And that's why on reflection, I fucking hate that they had a teaser before the OP. It showcases the end of the introductory arc where Keyaru has gone crazy, attacked the princess, and set fire to the castle. A great storytelling moment for sure, but it takes away from that misdirection of the proper introduction to the story. We no longer have that sense of familiarity and comfort because we've seen firsthand that things are going to turn very dark at some point, which robs the twist of a lot of the impact it would have otherwise had. But speaking of darkness, let's talk about the core premise of Redo of Healer because the idea it introduces serves as the foundation for everything that's to come. So that voice that Keyaru heard was actually his own. Keyaru regains his memories from the future in which Keyaru had been chosen as a hero specializing in healing. However, healing someone causes him to experience all the suffering and trauma himself, meaning that healing is a psychologically damaging process for him. He refused to keep healing but was imprisoned, and narcotics were used to make him an addict and to force him to continue healing. He was also subjected to extreme physical, mental, and sexual abuse on a near-daily basis. But as it turns out, when Keyaru takes in the experiences of his patients, he not only gets their trauma but also their knowledge and skills. He eventually absorbs the drug resistance skill, which allows him to break his addiction and regain his lucidity, though he bides his time and continues to act the part of a mind-broken slave. When the party of heroes, all of whom were active participants in the aforementioned abuse, confront the Demon Lord, they basically party wipe, at which point Keyaru does a heel turn, leaves them to die, and confronts the Demon Lord solo. He does this with a very creative interpretation of healing that I'll talk more about in a bit. After killing the Demon Lord, he obtains the Philosopher's Stone and uses that power to turn back time to fight against the corrupt kingdom and to get revenge on the heroes who had abused him. Of course, things can be different because he left himself a message, which ultimately led to him getting the sight of the spirits and regaining his old memories, allowing him to prepare for what's to come and to ultimately enact some rather brutal revenge. He starts microdosing himself with wild narcotic plants to develop a drug tolerance, and decides to let things play out as they did before. For a time. When the opportunity presented itself, he broke free, cornered Princess Flare, and proceeded to both torture and do other not very nice things to her before wiping her memories and kidnapping her. And as he's getting more and more psychotic, I started feeling a lot of mixed emotions about him, but in a good way. See, the thing about Keyaru is that after watching the show, I realized that he's one of my new favorite examples of a morally grey protagonist. His natural personality is generally cheerful and kind, but the trauma he endured basically turned him into a sociopath who has almost no limits to his cruelty when getting revenge on those that wronged him. And he has no problem using innocent people as pawns in his twisted machinations, including sacrificing them when the situation calls for it. But at the same time, while revenge is the surface level motivator, he's also fueled by a strong underlying sense of justice. He not only wants revenge on Princess Flare and the other heroes for abusing him, he wants to topple the entire corrupt regime that created a nation that regularly engages in slavery, imperialism, and outright genocide. He makes a point of waiting for his targets to demonstrate that they're still evil in this new timeline before making any moves against them, because he wants to make sure that the current versions of them still deserve it. He ends up acquiring a few women on his journey, including the newly brainwashed Flare and a beast woman slave named Setsuna, who voluntarily bound herself to him in exchange for saving her village. And though he consciously considers them as nothing more than tools, useful both for their combat prowess and as outlets for his sexual urges, he ends up growing to deeply care for them, even if he's in denial about it. Keyaru, or Keyaruga as he calls himself, is a good person at his core who has been psychologically broken, and this results in a surprisingly complex character who manages to simultaneously be likable and also detestable. His aims are sympathetic, but some of his actions are difficult to stomach, even when his targets are horrifically evil sadists themselves. I still shudder a bit when I think of how the Blade arc concluded. No spoilers, but holy fucking shit. But speaking of Keyaru as a character, I think now would be a good time to discuss something I briefly mentioned at the beginning of the video. The very clear Rance Inspiration. Just at a glance, the similarities are pretty striking. In the visuals alone, Keyaru and Flare look like Rance and Syl. Keyaru himself takes a lot of Rance's traits such as skewed morals, sex drive, and self-centered perspective, and just replaces the comedic elements with severe emotional and sexual trauma. Flare starts out as a psychotic sadistic princess, not unlike Leah, and after her mind wipe becomes a docile, subservient sweetheart who's madly in love with Keyaru. Kinda like Syl. The driving narrative makes it so that much of Keyaru's evil deeds are more palatable due to his opponents being even more evil, which is a common tactic the Rance games utilize in their writing. Now granted, the Redo of Healer anime is only a season deep so far, and while it's definitely going at a pretty fast pace, there's still probably a lot of story left to go. But I can see Rance's fingerprints all over this story. But rather than a comedy epic, it's more of a pointed, deliberate narrative with a bit of a Count of Monte Cristo-esque cold edge to it. It's an interesting take on an already subversive style of storytelling, and I am very much here for it. In fact, I started reading the books not too long ago. I had jury duty, so there wasn't really anything I could do but read. And though I'm not very far into them just yet, it's only amplified my curiosity about this world and these characters. There are so many things going on, and I just want to know more about it. There are many things I could discuss about Redo of Healer, including some very interesting psychological concepts, but in the interest of keeping this video as spoiler-free as possible, since I do think you should go and watch Redo of Healer, I'm going to leave off with a bit about the magic system. Those of you who've been watching my videos know that I always love a good magic system, and I think that when done well, it adds a unique tint to a fictional world. And Redo of Healer has some interesting takes on magic. So for starters, there's Keyaru's own healing that he uses to kill people, steal abilities, and turn back time. The books explain this in a bit more detail, but everything that Keyaru can do stems from how his healing magic functions at its core. The reason he experiences all the pain and suffering of his patients is because his magic heals by restoring the body to its original state, requiring Keyaru to absorb their experiences so he can know what that original state is. This is in contrast to the typical healing magic, which simply amplifies the body's natural processes. And with some experimentation, Keyaru manages to figure out how to use his magic to transform people, including himself, not just to a previous form, but to any form he wants. He learns how to copy the abilities of others as he absorbs their experiences. He learns how to alter the way his healing affects the body so that it kills rather than saves. And when he gains the sheer power of the Philosopher's Stone, he's able to apply that transformation to reality itself and turn back time. That's all really fucking cool, and I love seeing these subversive takes on traditional magic systems. Rather than just having inherently destructive magical abilities, the core premise of Redo of Healer relies on a clever interpretation of what healing is and what it's capable of. In the same way as the common trope of an expert poisoner naturally becoming a capable healer and vice versa. That being said, the overall magic system is a bit cryptic in the anime. It plays itself off as a soft magic system, but there are enough rules and quirks that it becomes clear that it's a hard magic system that's just unexplained. You know that there are explicit levels of magical spells, that there's a leveling system, and that heroes kinda bend the rules a bit, but not a whole lot else. The books actually do explain it more thoroughly, and holy shit, it's the single most video gamey magic system I've ever seen outside of actual video games. Like, there's stat points, experience, party modifiers, skill slots, ability levels. It's actually kind of insane, and I'm very curious to see if it actually remains consistent, because I feel like it could go either way. But that's the books, not the anime. In the anime, while I definitely like the mechanics of magic to be a bit more clear to complement Keyaru's clever manipulation of those mechanics, I do think it works well enough for what it is. It's functional, and while it does feel a bit contrived at times, it never gets to the point of actually breaking immersion. Or at least it doesn't in the one season we have so far. I went into Redo of Healer with basically no expectations. My guess was that it was basically going to be an edgy, rapey villain origin story. And while that's not entirely inaccurate, I was pleasantly surprised to find some pretty complex ideas beneath the shock value, a story that draws you in, and characters that can make you feel a variety of often conflicting emotions, which makes you uncomfortable in the best kind of way. It wears its Rance influence on its sleeve, but takes its own approach to things. This is definitely a series I'm going to be following both with the anime and the books, and I would recommend the same to you. It's not perfect, but there's definitely stuff there to sink your teeth into. Thanks for watching. I know it's been a minute, but I had a lot of life stuff happen, including a new job and getting T-boned, which was fun. I'm perfectly fine, by the way. I'm going to try to get back to uploading a bit more regularly, and in particular, finishing up the Rance 03 video because it's already taken me far longer than I'd like. Big thank you to my patrons, especially my $10 supporters, Bulk Squat Thrust and President Irina Vladimirovna Putina. All members got to see this video early, so if you'd like that, you can join below for as little as $1 a month. If that's not your thing, consider leaving a like and subscribing if you want more. Believe it or not, that actually does help a lot. Well, with all that being said, thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Play the Electro Swing.
Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more.